got up one day this week, and as is custom with me, at some point in time, as the day progresses, I crawl on social media. What I see, it is National Pina Colada Day. And it gets me thinking, like every time I get on social media, it seems like, now this is my perspective, but it just seems like it's always National Fill in the Blank Day of something, right? Like it's just, you can't get enough of them. And so I got curious, and so I started Googling, because that's what you do, right? You Google, and I find a site that actually lists all of these national fill in the blank days. And to my amazement, every day it's not like just, there's one national day and it's on that day for whatever that thing is. It's like there's tons of these things, and there's tons of them every day. So I felt like I had to enlighten you and show you what July has been about so far, because you need to see this. And so National July 1st, National Postal Worker Day, which, okay, that makes sense. Then we go to National Postage Stamp Day, but now it gets a little creative. National Creative Ice Cream Flavors Day. I don't know how those all go together, but that's July 1st. If you miss those, catch them next year. Go to July 4th, because that's a fun one around here, right? Independence Day. National Country Music Day. I get it, right? It's Independence Day, Country Music Day. National Hillbilly Day. I don't know if that applies to the Metroplex as much, but there it is. National Barbecued Spare Ribs Day, which should be every day, right? And then this is the funny one to me. On all of those things, we tack on National Caesar Salad Day, because I don't know, like somebody said, I don't want ribs, I don't like barbecue, burgers, hot dogs, let's just go with the Caesar salad. Those people are not celebrating Independence Day. We need to all agree on that. The one, though, that we should all pay attention to next year, make sure you mark this down, July 6th, National Fried Chicken Day. Okay, that's just one everybody should remember. And if you're behind or you didn't look at all of this morning, I wanted to catch you up to date. So let's look at today, July 15th, National Give Something Away Day, National I Love Horses Day, National Tapioca Pudding Day. I'm sorry for the one person in the Metroplex that's your day, because that's not right. Now this is good, National Pet Fire Safety Day. When my smoke alarm used to go off when we had dogs, they didn't do anything but bark and hide under the couch. So I don't know how you teach them anything about fire safety, but there it is. And then, because on July 1st, all these flavored ice cream days is not good enough. Now, National Ice Cream Day, just for the plain old vanilla in all of us. That's what you're missing if you haven't been paying attention. Every time you turn around, there's a National Fill in the Blank Day. Now, here's the thing. To somebody, that day is important, right? Like somebody actually had to go to all of the trouble to get online, Google the nationalfillintheblank.org website. I don't know if it's real, but I just made it up. Google that, download the PDF file, print it off, right? Fill it in, scan it back, shoot it off to the organization, so that one day, hopefully with enough votes or whatever it takes, you're going to get a national something day, right? Somebody somewhere, it mattered enough that they did that to all those things. Like, I'm sitting here going, like, who did tapioca pudding? Seriously, admit it, please. Come forward, right? There's a couple. Okay, all right. So I'm in trouble now. It should not be a day. I'm sorry, but it's important. It's important enough for somebody somewhere, right? So somebody took the time, went to all the trouble, and got this thing rolling, so we could have National, again, fill in the blank, whatever it is for you, day. That's how they thought about representing what they like. That profession or that food or that activity, whatever it is, that's how they wanted to, they felt like this kind of helps it stand out. Like this is how we can stand out. I can bring awareness to my cause or my profession by making it one of these national days, right? I think, now you may laugh at me, but I think there's a bit of a correlation between those national fill in the blank days and a lot of times Christianity, or at least as we seek to follow God. If you're here this morning, you're obviously at least open to the idea that maybe there's a God and we should learn more about him and follow him. And I think there is a bit of a correlation between all of these national fill in the blank days and the way we follow God. Because so many times what do? We try to stand out for God in ways that almost feel a little bit like these fill in the blank days. Like we've just created a little petition, but it's not a petition. You know what it is? It's a bumper sticker, or it's a t-shirt, or it's somebody we're trying to convince of something, and we're trying to get them to buy off and come to our program or a Sunday morning service. And honestly, it feels a little bit like sometimes we think taking a stand for Jesus is kind of like just getting people to pay attention to the national fill in the blank day. And what we end up having is just a long list of Christian tchotchke type of things. You know what tchotchke is? I was thinking about this week, these little trinkets that you get in places. Like when you remember when 3D movies were finally starting to get good? Like, I got to be honest, in the 80s, they weren't good. I think we still had just the little Polaroid flexi things and they weren't very good. But 3D movies are pretty good now. But when you go to the movie, you realize you pay for the glasses, and now because it's commonplace, they become tchotchkes. So what do? You pay for the glasses, and when you're walking out, you give them the glasses back. Like, we don't even care anymore. We give it all back because we have too much of this stuff in our junk drawers at home. Sometimes our faith, the way we seek to stand up for God, is really kind of a tchotchke type of faith. In other words, we're just using little things, little superficial things that we attach our faith to. And that can create problems. I thought about it again. If I get on Facebook one more time and somebody asks me to like a picture of what looks like a California surfer Jesus, and if I don't press like, then I really don't love Jesus, my head's just going to explode. That's a tchotchke way of standing up for God. Now, if you do that, please, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to offend anybody, but the reality is, it just hitting like doesn't do a whole lot, right? It doesn't do a whole lot for you. It doesn't do a whole lot for everybody else. Because only the people who really like you are going to pay attention to it, and even they aren't going to click like, because I don't do it for my relatives either. So, right? So how do we stand out for God? How do we stand out for God in a culture that is more and more hostile? And I'm going to say something about that in a minute. But how do we stand out for God in the right ways, at the right times, in the right moments? Because standing out for something matters. We know that. We know that we need to stand up, stand out. We need for people to understand who we are, what we believe. That's important. We understand that, but what does it look like? The next 5 weeks, we're going to do this series called Stand. We're going to actually go through an Old Testament book, and I always say this to you, I want to be very careful. The Old Testament is an interesting book in churches today. For most Christians, we're not always sure what to do with the Old Testament. The Old Testament feels like it's just nothing more than a bunch of rules and regulations. And so as Christians living under the grace of Jesus Christ, a lot of times we go back and we read all these rules and we think, well, we have to just be doing all this stuff. This is going to make us better Christians if we just do this stuff. The reality is the Old Testament is this story, and Jesus is in the story. And the story is constantly revealing to us our need for a Savior, our inability to do all the stuff that's listed. But in that stuff, there are these principles, there are these things we can learn about how God interacts with us and how we can interact with the culture. So it's not that it's not important, it's very important. That's why it's there. But we have to look at it in a unique way. I want to start by also clarifying something. When we talk about stand over the next 5 weeks, it's not because we're going to list all the ills in our culture, right? I don't want this to be a series where we're sitting here in our little Sunday morning setting and we're pointing it to everybody outside these walls saying, well, here's all the bad stuff that's going on in the world today. This is not about me getting up here and accusing the world of all of these bad things. I don't like that. I think when Christians take that mindset, what happens is we feel like from God we're supposed to go out and just convert everybody. We're supposed to overcome just those evil things. I think we need to think differently. Because I don't think it's about us conquering culture. I think we are supposed to create culture. I think that's why people want to be in a church. If a church is healthy, if it's growing, if God's in the midst of a group of people, people want to be there because we are supposed to be different. And we live differently, and it inspires people, right? And they sense something different and new. So here's the questions I want to set you up with this morning, because I want you to think a little differently as we think about standing out for God. I don't want you to think about, how do I stand out against the evils of the world? Right? That's one way of thinking about that question. I want you to think instead about, how do I stand out for the Savior of the world? Not how do I stand out against the evils of the world? How do I stand out for the Savior of the world? When I do that, the evils are going to be there until Christ overcomes this whole thing. But when I stand out for the Savior of the world, then I become the hand of God in this world, right? And people will find safety and security, and they're going to find peace, and they're going to find the things that they're really looking for. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to look at the book of Daniel. Daniel is an interesting book. There are some prophetic parts of Daniel. What that means is there are some things where Daniel will be speaking and being the voice of God, okay, and delivering a message from God. But Daniel is not classified in the Old Testament series of books. He's not classified as a prophetic book. It's actually considered history because it is about a group of people. It's about the people of God in a really hostile world. What's happened is the Israelites, all of their land, all of their country has been taken over by the Babylonians. And a king named Nebuchadnezzar, say that a bunch of times real fast. It's open. Trust me, I don't hear many kids name that today. If you're looking for something unique for your next boy, Nebuchadnezzar would do it. The book doesn't just talk about the voice of God. It starts to lay out a history of the people, and God is trying to deliver a message, a core message to his people. That no matter what's going on, even though you've been conquered, even though you're living under this rule, under this slavery in a sense, that God is still at work. I said it this way, and I think I put this in your note. The book of Daniel encourages God's people to live with confidence that God is at work in spite of appearances. This book, the whole theme is just that God's people would understand and live with confidence that no matter what the appearances are, no matter what's going on in the world, that they actually can know that God is with them. So what's happened? Nebuchadnezzar has taken over. He's basically knocked down their city walls. There's no protection. They've been scattered. Jerusalem is no more. The temple has been burned down. He's crushed anything that would reflect God's relationship with the Israelites. See, it's not just that he wants to conquer the land. He's not just trying to, this is not like, oh, this is a colonial thing. We're going to go expand our borders. Nebuchadnezzar actually wants to do away with any other religion than his. And he especially hates the God of the Bible. And so he's squashing all that would represent the God of the Bible among the Israelites. Now, he's not just trying to destroy their current situation. He's actually going to start destroying their future situation as well. Let's pick it up in verse 3 of Daniel 1. It says, "Then the king commanded Ashpenaz," another good name, "his chief eunuch," I'm sorry I have to say this, I guess if you're going to be a eunuch, you want to be the chief, that sounds pretty good, "his chief eunuch to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace and teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans." This is an amazing passage. You get a lot right here of what Nebuchadnezzar is really up to. When countries around the globe, if the economy starts to fall apart or there's civil war, you've seen this, and people do what? They leave those places, right? They go other places. They try to take their families someplace safe. When that starts to happen because of especially civil war or somebody conquering them, the local country wants to stop that. I mean, first of all, nobody wants war on their land, in their turf. But the other thing is there's a phrase called brain drain. Have you heard this? Brain drain is when your smartest and your brightest and your best and your youngest start leaving your country. And companies wrestle with this. And if I'm Microsoft, I want the best of the best. And so that's what I do. I go hire the best of the best. If all of a sudden somebody starts to hire them away from me, I have to figure out why they're doing that. What is it that they're offering? Because I don't want to lose the best of the best. It's my future. The future hinges on the best of the best, always being there and coming up through the people. This is a situation where you've got Nebuchadnezzar is going to Israel and he's taking their best. He's taking the absolute best, the hope they have of any rebuilding. He's taking their future and he's destroying it by capturing their brightest. And he starts to bring them in and he starts to convert them, if you will. He starts to turn their thinking. Verse 5, let's keep going. It says, the king assigned them a daily portion of food that the king ate. They got the best of the best. And of the wine that he drank. And they were to be educated for 3 years. And at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. It's kind of like he sent them away to college. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Again, great names, of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belshazzar. Hananiah he called Shadrach. Mishael he called Meshach. And Azariah he called Abednego. He changed their names. Do you see what's starting to happen? You see the plan here. Nebuchadnezzar's got a plan. He's smart. He knows what he's doing. He destroyed the nation, but now he's going to destroy their future. He's going to take all the things that represented God in the temple. He's going to crush it. Now he's going to take all the people of God and he's going to bring them in. And he's going to start to educate them and he's going to start to dress them and he's going to start to teach them and he's going to start to kind of enlarge their understanding of the world. He's going to teach them more things about them. And they're going to start to understand the language, and then they're going to eat this really great food. And he's going to remove everything from them that represented God in their lives. He changes their names. He changes their schooling. He changes their language. He relocates them, but watch what happens. At this point, you would think there would just be a massive uprising like these young men because they're the biggest and the brightest and the best, right? These are the strong men in a culture, and you would think they're going to rise up. They're going to find a way to push back. They've got to figure out a way to make a stand for God, but watch what they do. Verse 8, but Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that the king drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. You notice how subtle that is? You can read it, and you can read this stuff really quickly and miss some of this stuff, but it's just so brilliantly subtle that Daniel has just been totally dislocated. Everything's been stripped away, name changed, diet's now changing. I mean, everything is being forced upon him, and he doesn't just have this stand up, scream at the top of his lungs type of reaction. He just very wisely begins to do something. Instead of focusing on his own name, he starts to focus on God's fame. Right? For him to stand out, he starts focusing on God's fame over his name. That's what we need to do. Instead of focusing on the temple that's been taken away, or the land, or the clothes, or the language of the families, or his relocation, instead of focusing on all the pain he's been suffering, the frustration, he simply stands up and has this very civil request. Why? The food the king was going to eat in his palace would have been sacrificed, offered to pagan idols. He says, Daniel basically is realizing this. He's taken our clothes. He's changed our names. So what? He's relocated us. Yeah, it's not fun. But now he wants us to consume something that's been offered to a pagan idol. Now he's going to demand something of us where he totally separates us from what we've been known about as being associated as the people of God. Now, again, don't get confused. We know in the New Testament, one of Jesus' disciples, Peter, would write later on, and he would say the food is not bad, right? We understand that there were food laws, and so in the Old Testament, pork was off limits, probably because they'd never tried bacon, obviously, but pork was off limits, and we like to speculate today, well, why was that? There was no refrigeration, pork, they're dirty animals, whatever. Look, can we leave it real simple? God set up some laws So that what? So that his people could be distinguished from the rest of the world. He's not saying today you have to hold to that. Peter comes in and Peter goes, no, it's all clean. God says it's clean. I know I didn't believe him at first too, but there it is. He says it's clean. So the food is not the issue. It's the fact that at this time in the history of the world, God's people were known, were distinguished, were set apart because of their diets. And now this king comes along and he says, I want you to eat this food. See, now they're not even worried about the clothes. They're not worried about the temple even at this point. There's just nothing they can do about that. But now he says, I want you to consume this food. I want you to break from your God. Completely break away. And again, Daniel and his boys, they didn't protest. At least that we see, we don't see any evidence of them rising up, of demanding this and saying our rights are being violated. Of course, back then there were not many rights. It was just whoever had the stronger upper hand. But it is interesting that Daniel simply makes a request. He makes a request. He starts to focus on the fame of God over his name. That he does. My name is whatever it is. You can call me whatever you want. But here's what I want to focus on. Now look at how this works out. Look at how this request started. Verse 8. Go back to verse 8. It says, but Daniel resolved that he would not defy himself. In other words, in standing up for God, it wasn't just about God's fame as well over his name, over Daniel's name, but he decided in advance what he believed. Part of standing out for God is deciding in advance what you believe, right? That the state of the world that Daniel was in, his argument, all of his buddies, we could have basically said, look, they were probably better off in that palace anyway. They were probably going to be getting better food. They were probably going to be better clothed, right? There are all these arguments that we could say, hey, Daniel and his buddies really are going to be better off. But Daniel decided in advance, it doesn't matter what you offer me. Here's my stand. Think about that today. My wife and I have been talking about this a lot. We all work jobs and we get raises and good things come into our lives. And it's funny, but I thought about it this week. I've never heard somebody say, oh yeah, I got a raise and God just really blessed me. I hear that. What I've never heard is, oh, I got a raise. I don't think God's blessing me in this thing, right? If we get a raise, if we get a promotion, we always chalk it up to there's something good going on in our lives. Somebody could have looked at these boys and said, hey, God's really taking care of you. Because, he's giving you some better food. He's giving you better, he's giving you some richer food. He's giving you a place to live. You're going to grow up with wealth. You're going to grow up with education. You're going to have the ability at some time, you're going to have the ability to speak to the known world because of your multiple languages you're going to encounter. You're part of the ruling system of the world, the known world at that time. Hey, this is better. Nobody would have faulted these guys for just eating the food. They were prisoners. Nobody would have faulted them for it. Yet, they understood. Daniel understood. He decided in advance, I can do some things, but here's where I draw my line. And how many times do we do that in our lives? Do we predetermine? Do we think about it enough to predetermine, I need to draw a line here. And before I ever get there, before that ever happens to me, I need to draw a line. I tell couples when I do premarital counseling, I ask them to think long and hard where their financial ceiling is. What is it you have to have in life? You need to know that. Because if you don't know it, you'll take anything that comes along. You'll take anything that comes along that looks like it's offering more, offering the next level. And the question is that really what God wants? So many times in our culture, we just take whatever comes at us. We haven't predetermined, we haven't pre-thought about, and then we get in trouble. Where is your line? Office affairs happen. Why? Because a lot of times we have not predetermined in advance where our line is, what our convictions are, what we really believe. And you get in a rough time like Daniel. Listen, these guys are in a rough time. They could have easily just eaten this food and kept going, never thought twice about it. Oh, God's found a way to take care of us. Everybody else is in captivity and man, they're being oppressed, but he's protecting us, this little remnant. But Daniel says, no. I'm not going to be separated from God in that way. I'm not going to let them separate me from identifying with the God of the universe. I said it this way in my notes. Getting ahead in life is not the priority of a godly life. Getting ahead in life is not the priority of a godly life. Now, I need to, again, please understand, I'm not saying that earning a living and making money and even getting big benefits, maybe you will make a lot of money. But what's the priority? What's the priority? You want to stand out for God, the priority cannot be just making absolutely everything this life has to offer. That's not a godly life. Daniel says, you can call me whatever you want. You can dress me however you want. You can limit my rights. You can change my address. But you can't defame the name of God. You can't defame the name of God. And I've decided that. And that's where my line is. Let's keep going. I want to read you this last section this week, and we'll close out chapter 1. This will be a long section, but there's some great stuff going on. It says, and the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king. Now notice he says, my lord the king. Lord, that title Lord could be used multiple ways. And here this eunuch is saying, my Lord, the one who's in charge of me right now is the king. And here's what I fear him. He says, he's assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you're in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? In other words, if I let you eat whatever you want, I fear my king. Because he's going to start to see that maybe your health is slipping and then I'm going to be in trouble. So, would you endanger my head with the king? Then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, he said, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you. Put it to the test. Let us have this menu that we're saying is best for us and keeps us associated with our God. Let us have this menu and just test it. Put us to the test. Verse 14, so he listened to them in this matter, and he tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food, something he would not have expected. So the steward took away their food and the wine they were to drink, and he gave them vegetables. As for the 4 youths, God gave them learning and skill in all the literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. And at the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, so after 3 years now, that you see how quickly that verse just kind of dismisses 3 years. At the end of that time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them. And among all of them, none of them was like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They stood out. Therefore, they stood before the king, and in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. They were left in that situation. They were captive. But notice, in standing out for God, they presented a plan instead of just protesting a people. Let me explain that. They presented a plan instead of protesting a people. At this point in time, you would expect Daniel and his boys to be pushing back, to be demanding some different things, to even go on a hunger strike. We're just not going to eat that. But you get this sense that the people who have been put to watch over Daniel, that all of a sudden they're starting to have a relationship of some kind. Because he says, hey, don't get me in trouble with my king. Like, I'm just trying to do what my boss says. I know you may not like it, and I know it's not what you want, but instead of just hanging this guy out to dry, Daniel comes up with a little plan. And he earns his favor. And God grants them favor. And so they do this little experiment. And all of a sudden, Daniel and his boys are thriving in a way that nobody else had seen. And what do you think starts to happen? I love the fact that Daniel and his guys started having compassion on the eunuch and all the men under him and the people in charge of them. I love that they have that compassion, but look what starts to happen now. Like there's a camaraderie and there's trust and God's giving them favor. And now all of a sudden, these men who follow the God of the universe are now advisors to the king of this known world. And is he a good king? No. Is he a righteous king? No. Does he trap other countries? Does he destroy their borders? Does he take people as slaves? Yes. But now God has these people in place who have his ear, who get to speak into his life. And they're seeing something different. I want you to think for just a second. Most of the time when you hear what does it mean to stand out for God, to take a stand for God, most of the time in our lives, it's a very public thing. It's a very invasive thing. It's kind of a tense moment. Maybe you're thinking, oh, there's going to be arguments if I do this. And I want you to see what it can look like. Because a lot of times when I take a stand, me personally in the past, it's always been about me. Right? It's always been about my convictions. Like I need these people to understand my convictions. I need this king to understand who I am. I need this king to understand what I believe. Daniel and his boys see this differently. Their stand is not about them. It's about God. Even though they're prisoners, even though they're captive, even though the captors are in the wrong, Daniel and his boys are not wrong in this situation, right? But when they stand out most is kind of with this quiet, measured response. When they don't make it about them. When they offer that little solution. When they have that relationship with the guard. I said it this way. We don't stand out to be different. We should stand out to identify with God. As Christians, that's our call. It's not to stand out just to be different, right? We don't want to be different for different sake. If you're in business, you've heard a phrase of this before, right? We don't change things just for the sake of change. That doesn't make any sense, right? As Christians, as people who seek to follow God, if maybe that's something you've misunderstood or you would think in the past, that's all I've ever seen is Christians that just want to shove things at me and tell me how to do things. I'm telling you, look, to stand out just for the sake of being different is not right. If you want to stand out, it means you got to start identifying with God. Now, that might mean that you have to stand up in a way that does cause some problems. But I would offer that a lot of times, that's not how it works. And a lot of times we get sucked in. You ever do this? You get on Facebook or you get on something and you think, I'm just going to check up on something. And then all of a sudden you get into this, somebody puts an article up, somebody comments about it. And then all of a sudden there's 50 comments later and you're sucked into this thing. And now you're mad and your blood pressure's up and you're trying to formulate a response. And yeah, I did that one day this week and I thought to myself, no. Nobody above the thread's going to read it. Nobody cares. I'm just going to make a mess of this thing. When I step in and say this out of context or without any other thing leading up to it, people are just going to say, oh, well, Cecil said this, or why does Cecil believe that? Or now I can't go to that church, right? Because I know what he believes. It's not about me. And I don't want to stand out just to be different. I want to identify with God. And so many times, it's in a quiet, measured response that the greatest good is done. We're going to pick this story up next week, but I want to pose this to you. Is it possible that in your life, where you're at right now, in the way you're living or trying to work out your faith, is it possible that you're trying to stand for God in a way that's more about you than it is Him? Is it possible that some of the things that you wrestle with, that it's more about you than it is Him? Is it possible some of the things you want to rise up and call out, maybe in your family or or at work. We all know that that's a dangerous place. Is it possible that some of that stuff is really more about you than it is about the fame of God? Is it possible? And if so, what would he have you do with that? Let me pray for us.